strike on Syria. The United States launches missiles in response to Syrian chemical attacks. Tonight, reaction from lawmakers and leaders around the world. Terror in Sweden. Fear in downtown Stockholm after a truck slams into a department store. Gorsuch confirmed.
The ayes are 54. The nays are 45.
Using new rules, the Senate approves Judge Neil Gorsuch to become the 113th Supreme Court Justice, and on location in northern Iraq.
Rebuilding is a long way away.
Lauren Ashburn reports from a Christian town once controlled by ISIS. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, April 7th, 2017. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. President Donald Trump orders a U.S. missile strike against the Syrian air base, blamed for this week's chemical attack against civilians. Trump calls the decision vital for our national security. The Pentagon says all but one of the 59 U.S. missiles hit their targets, marking the first time the U.S. has directly attacked Syrian President Bashar Assad's forces. President Trump calls it a justified and proportional response to Syria's crimes against its own people.
Using a deadly nerve agent, Assad choked out the lives of helpless men, women, and children.
The prior administration threatened to attack Assad's forces after other chemical attacks, but President Obama never followed through. The president's national security advisor was at his side when Trump ordered the attack. H.R. McMaster spoke about the decision, saying, "We weighed the risk, but we weighed that against the risk of inaction, the risk of this continued, egregious, inhumane attacks on innocent civilians with chemical weapons." The White House says events were set in motion Tuesday morning, leading up to the missile launch less than 72 hours later. At a press conference with the King of Jordan this week, President Trump expressed the shock he experienced when seeing video of children suffering the effects of poison gas, a turning point for his position on Syria.
When you kill innocent children, innocent babies, little babies, with a chemical gas that is so lethal, people were shocked to hear what gas it was. That crosses many, many lines.
The U.S. missile strikes in Syria overshadowed today's historic meeting between President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Trump says he has developed an outstanding relationship with the Chinese president, saying they made tremendous progress in their first face-to-face talks. It's not clear what they decided about trade agreements or the threat of nuclear weapons in North Korea. The White House is downplaying expectations, calling this an introductory meeting.
The relationship developed by President Xi and myself, I think, is outstanding. We look forward to being together many times in the future. And I believe lots of very potentially bad problems will be going away.
The two leaders may get another chance to meet soon. Chinese state media reports that Trump has accepted an invitation from Xi to travel to China later this year. Some lawmakers are praising the president's move to attack the Syrian air base, but others are demanding Congress give its approval. Correspondent Jason Calvi continues our team coverage from Capitol Hill. Jason?
Why, the Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war, but they didn't approve the strikes last night. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says the vice president did call him to let him know about the attacks, but today big questions swirling here at the Capitol.
Dozens of American cruise missiles pound a Syrian airbase, causing lawmakers to debate, did the president have the authority to act?
But doing this without consulting Congress, without a vote, I think is a clear violation of law.
It's not just the former Democratic vice presidential nominee raising questions. Republican Senator Rand Paul says the Constitution requires Congress to approve military action. He points to the problems of fighting Syria's president.
Destabilizing Assad, you empower the civil war to go on longer, and there'll be more death and more mass migration out of Syria.
But Senate Armed Services Chairman John McCain supports the missile launches.
Does it require congressional authorization?
No.
No? Why not?
because the United States of America is responding to the commission of war crimes. And if anybody thinks that that needs to be delayed, stopping the murder, senseless murder of innocent women, men, women, and children, they are wrong, and I don't respect them.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell also says the American attack was justified.
You don't use chemical weapons without consequences. I think that's a pretty clear message. And I don't necessarily read into that a larger strategy in the area.
Raising another question, is this just a one-time attack or the start of something more?
If Assad as much blinks that he's going to use chemical weapons again, then we take out his Air Force.
Senator McConnell says he'd be happy to look at formally authorizing military force if President Trump feels he needs it. Wyatt?
So, Jason, what's the next step at the Capitol then?
Well, Congress has kicked off their Easter recess, but Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi tweeting that Congress needs to come back to debate the use of military force. That's a message that's been echoed by a Republican Congressman, Mike Gallagher, also saying that they should not be taking an undeserved recess.
Correspondent Jason Calvi reporting from Capitol Hill. Thanks, Jason. And many world leaders support President Trump's decision to bomb the airbase, calling the move a proportionate response to Syria's use of chemical weapons. Vatican correspondent Mary Shovlin joins us from Rome with more on the global reaction. Mary, first, how is Italy's government reacting?
Wyatt, Italy says the U.S. strikes on Syria were proportionate given the war crimes committed by the Assad regime in using chemical weapons against its own people. Italy's urging Russia to use its influence with Damascus to enforce a ceasefire and express their hope that a renewed dialogue between Russia and the U.S. could lead to a UN-guided political transition in Syria. And we know that here in Italy, they're one of our closest allies and have stood by our side and participated in many U.S.-led military coalitions in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Okay, so that's Italy. So how are other European countries in the region reacting?
Why many leaders across Europe are voicing their support. German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President Francois Hollande said in a joint statement today after speaking on the phone that President Assad alone is carrying the responsibility for these developments. And in his repeated use of using chemical weapons against his own people, the British government says it was informed in advance about the U.S. missile strikes, and they said they firmly support President Trump's decision. But beyond Europe as well, Wyatt, we're hearing voices of support from Israel to Turkey to Australia to Japan. So overall, it's wide-ranging support. Many wondering if this was just a one-off or is this a change in U.S. foreign policy?
Have you heard at this point, Mary, if there's any reactions there at the Vatican so far?
Not yet, Wyatt, but let's recall that it was just 2 days ago that Pope Francis strongly condemned what he called unacceptable carnage from the chemical weapons attack. He called on the consciences of all political leaders to cease this tragedy and bring relief to the people of Syria that he says have been exhausted by war for too long.
Mary Shovlin, our EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thanks very much, Mary.
Thank you, Wyatt.
The U.S. missile strike against Syria raises an important moral question, whether the president's use of military force is considered just war.
I can't imagine that the use of force to prevent, deter this kind of atrocity couldn't be justified.
We spoke with Tony Perez, a law professor and expert on just war theory. He says that the principles of whether or not military action, like the firing of missiles against Syria, can be described as just comes down to three main factors. It must be fought by a legitimate authority, that legitimate authority must use force for a right intention, and that the use of force must be for a just cause. Perez believes the president's decision to take military action, which Trump says was done to prevent further human suffering, was just.
Provided the intention was to serve that purpose and not some pretextual use of power, then it's hard for me to see a plausible moral objection to it.
As President Trump spoke to the nation, outlined his reasons for the attack on Syria, he invoked the name of God 3 times.
We ask for God's wisdom as we face the challenge of our very troubled world.
And offered his prayers.
We pray for the lives of the wounded and for the souls of those who have passed.
He is also the first U.S. president to conclude his remarks by asking for God's blessing for everyone.
God bless America and the entire world.
Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. Sweden's prime minister calls today's truck attack in Stockholm an act of terror. A large truck crashed into an upscale department store, killing at least 4 people and injuring more than a dozen. People nearby fled in panic, and Stockholm's central subway station was evacuated after the crash. No one claimed responsibility, but one person has been arrested in connection to the attack. The U.S. Senate confirms Judge Neil Gorsuch to join the Supreme Court as its 113th justice.
The nomination of Neil M. Gorsuch of Colorado to be an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States is confirmed.
The 54-45 vote comes after a partisan debate that could have lasting impacts for the Senate and High Court. Republicans changed the rules to get Gorsuch approved. We caught up with Texas Senator Ted Cruz, who told us Gorsuch is the right person for the job.
To have a justice who will be faithful to the law, who won't impose his policy preferences from the bench, and who will uphold our fundamental liberties like free speech, like religious liberty, like the Second Amendment. Today is a big victory for the Constitution, for the Bill of Rights, for the rule of law, and for the American people.
The White House says Judge Gorsuch will be sworn in Monday in 2 ceremonies, a private one by Chief Justice John Roberts at 9 a.m. and a public event at 11 a.m. at the White House. Joining us now is Senator Luther Strange, Republican from Alabama. Senator Strange, I want to ask you about Judge Neil Gorsuch, but first let's start with the news of the day, the U.S. attack on Syria. Was that the right move in your eyes?
I think it was exactly the right move, and I applaud the President for taking decisive action. I'm also proud of the men and women in the armed services who were able to pull it off so professionally and so well. So I think it's a good day for the region.
Where do you think we go from here, Senator? What needs to happen next?
Well, I think that we need to make sure that we have a plan going forward. I think that the message has been sent. Now I expect Congress will start working closely with the administration to figure out what the next steps are. But I feel like this will go a long way towards reestablishing America's credibility in the region, and so I'm very pleased to see the President's actions.
How else do you think taking action like this will help in terms of just our alliances, our being able to, I don't know, necessarily make threats against people like North Korea, just the overall impact of this?
Well, I think a lot of one of the main reasons we're in the situation we're in Syria is because America has made certain statements, drawn red lines and so forth, but has not been willing to follow through. And I think the fact that the President has actually backed up his commitment sends a message. And you're right, it will extend far beyond the Middle East. It will extend to North Korea and other parts of the world. Now that people know that America will follow through where necessary.
Well, I appreciate your thoughts on that, Senator. Moving now to Judge Neil Gorsuch. He was confirmed today after a filibuster and a whole rule change. This was a pretty rough fight on both sides. Was all this to get Gorsuch confirmed worth it? I mean, Senator, do you think this is good governance?
I think it's very well worth it. I think it was critically important for Neil Gorsuch to be confirmed to the Supreme Court. I'm proud to have voted for him and to have overcome the Democrats' delay tactics. It was unprecedented, frankly, and I'm glad to see us restored to the tradition where we give the President an up or down vote on these critical administration appointments and Supreme Court and lower court appointments.
A lot of people are worried, though, about long-term implications of this, either, again, on the Republican side, the rule change, or on the Democrat side, this filibuster. Are you worried about long-term implications of these rule changes and what happened?
Well, I'm very concerned about the institution of the Senate and that we operate according to longstanding traditions. And as I view this, we're returning to the longstanding tradition, which was 220 years of giving the President a vote, even in cases where there's significant controversy. Let's not forget about Clarence Thomas, for example, who got an up or down vote and was confirmed. So I don't see it spilling over into the legislative area. I think this is a return to where we should have been all along, and I'm sorry the Democrats took us to this point, but I'm glad that we've got it behind us now.
Senator Luther Strange, Republican from Alabama, thanks so much for talking with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Coming up, our special report from Iraq.
Just gun mortars.
Lauren Ashburn is on assignment to show us the perseverance of Christians in the country. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. Doctors near Mosul, Iraq warn ISIS is increasing attacks against civilians, even using snipers to shoot people in their homes. Doctors also accuse militants of holding people hostage and using them as human shields to protect themselves against the advancing Iraqi army. Hospitals are treating a significant number of people for shrapnel injuries, including children.
We had a few people last week, a mother and child. They were amputations. They were hit in their home, and we took care of them. ISIS is a very good marksman.
The Iraqi army is making progress in their fight to retake Mosul from ISIS, but the fighting has caused a humanitarian crisis. Thousands of people have been left displaced and traumatized. As Iraqis fight ISIS in Mosul, nearby liberated Christian towns look to rebuild. Lauren Ashburn brings us an EWTN News Nightly special report. She's on assignment in Iraq's Nineveh plain.
Wyatt, we are in the Christian town of Batnaya. It was under ISIS's control from 2014 until November 2016, when the Peshmerga, the Kurdish forces, and the U.S. liberated it. Rebuilding is a long way away. Cleanup is beginning despite a desperate need for financial assistance.
St. Kyriakos Church survived. ISIS didn't bomb it because they wanted to turn it into a mosque. Just yesterday, workers removed graffiti from inside that said Allah is great. A handful of Iraqis push rubble aside in this mostly deserted outpost. In the cemetery, graves overturned and desecrated. The cleanup in Batnaya is complicated by booby traps and IEDs left by ISIS. And in fact, ISIS is not far away. Just outside of Batnaya, the soldiers who liberated the town are still on high alert, on the front line. General Karim Farho has been fighting the war for 3 years. Tell me what we're hearing.
Just gun mortar sometimes. It's far from here, about 12 or 30 kilometers right now.
What's happening there?
It's fighting. There is a battle between the Iraqi army and ISIS in the west of Mosul.
Why are you here?
We are Peshmerga. It's our job to be here, to protect our people. No matter how they are Christian or Muslim or Yazidi, it's our job to protect them.
Wyatt, in our next town that we are going to visit, 400 Christian families have already moved in. Tonight they will say the Stations of the Cross at their church. We will have more on these ancient communities in the coming weeks as they struggle to survive.
Thank you, Lauren. That was Lauren Ashburn reporting from Iraq. Joining us now in studio is Andrew Walther, Vice President of Strategic Communications and Planning for the Knights of Columbus. Welcome back, Andrew.
Good to be here.
You've traveled to Iraq before. You've seen the conditions there. How is the international community? Are they making any progress really in helping the Christians?
Well, I think things are moving slowly. I've been told by the bishops there and others that there's a little bit more openness now in the past couple of months than there had been previously. But, you know, I think a year ago, our country used the right word in calling this genocide. Mm-hmm. And I think now, as things are sort of slowly moving forward, we're starting to see maybe the first inklings of the right actions, and certainly everyone is very hopeful that that will continue and blossom.
Next week is Holy Week. What kind of challenges do you think Christians will face in Iraq as they prepare for all the kinds of celebrations?
Well, it's not like home for us in a lot of ways, because in many of these towns, as you just saw with Lauren's report, you have towns that have been decimated, that have been devastated by bombing, by fighting, by ISIS deliberately. And so for a lot of these Christians, if they're trying to move home, this is maybe the first, well, this would be the first Holy Week that they might even be able to go home. But the conditions are still really terrible and in some cases quite dangerous.
The Knights of Columbus have been very active in Iraq, especially under very difficult conditions. How do leaders from different faiths work together under such conditions?
Well, one thing about adversity like this, like an ISIS genocide, is that it really can bring people together. And I know from being there and having talked to Yazidis and Christians of various different groups, whether they're Syriac Orthodox or Syriac Catholic or Chaldean Catholic, I mean, you find that people are pulling together in a way because of that adversity that's really incredible and a testament to the faith that we all share as Christians.
The Knights of Columbus also work with religious minorities, people of faith in Syria. Any indication on how they're doing following this attack?
Well, you know, Syria has been in terrible shape for years with the civil war. ISIS, of course, was killing the Christians there in even greater numbers than in Iraq. And you have a situation where it's still a very dangerous, very tenuous situation for all concerned. And certainly as we head into Holy Week, we can pray for peace and greater stability in that region. And I think that remembering what these people have had to go through, the Christians in Iraq and the Christians in Syria, just to keep their faith, just to practice their faith, is something that should really remind us to take our faith more seriously as well.
Is there anything else, Andrew, that people can do to help? I guess they can visit Knights of Columbus. What else?
Absolutely. They can come to our website. They can go to christiansAtRisk.org. We've put well over $12 million into this cause. We've really done a lot to try to help the people there. And I think that if in helping us to help them, that's one step people can take. These communities have too often been overlooked by U.S. or UN aid. And so, we've been filling some of those gaps. And they can also pray and really reflect and spread the word that these people are in real trouble, that there is a risk that if things don't change, they could literally disappear. They need our help. They need our prayers.
Absolutely.
And we need their example.
Absolutely. Andrew Walther with the Knights of Columbus, thanks so much for talking to us about it.
Thank you.
Up next, the changing face of people around the world when Muslim births are expected to outnumber Christians, and getting ready for hurricane season, this year's severe storm prediction. Today we remember Saint John Baptiste de La Salle on his feast day. He was a priest from France who established a network of Catholic schools for poor boys. His work has influenced teaching and school practices for more than 300 years. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. A sign of relief for people on the Atlantic coast. The hurricane season is expected to be a bit low-key this year.
Weekly drop-ins on those clinics serving.
Hurricane researchers at Colorado State University say a potentially weak El Nino, along with cooling in the North Atlantic and the tropical Atlantic, will make for a calmer year. Still, 11 named storms are predicted. Hurricane season runs from June through November. The world is witnessing a shift in population that could alter the balance of religion. A new Pew Research study estimates the number of babies born to Muslims will exceed Christian births by 2035. Muslims are expected to be the world's fastest growing religious group. More recently, Muslims made up an estimated 31% of births, while Christians made up 33%. A recently released undercover video graphically describes late-term abortion. The Center for Medical Progress released the shocking video last week. The group's founder, David Daleiden, told us there are more videos to come. He also talked to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly host Catherine Zeltner about what should happen if the U.S. is really serious about protecting the lives of unborn babies.
Frankly, law enforcement in every jurisdiction where there are abortions being done at or after 20 weeks ought to be routinely doing weekly check-ins, weekly drop-ins on those clinics, serving search warrants on their path labs and double-checking whether or not the babies are coming out intact and whether or not they're coming out alive.
To see more of Catherine's interview with David Daleiden, watch EWTN Pro-Life Weekly tonight at 11 Eastern on EWTN. It will re-air this Sunday at 10 a.m. And we thank you for watching tonight. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll see you back here on Monday. Good night, and God bless.